All right. Hey everyone. So today I'm going to talk about OpenReplay. It's an open source session replay tool and it's pretty awesome. You might have heard of some of their competitors such as replay.io or FullStory. Um, they are not open source. So as you guessed it, that's why I'm covering OpenReplay, which is an open source solution. But you don't want to see the website. You want to see how it's being deployed and what kind of like who's behind this. So I would say there's like four key developers contributing currently to OpenReplay, and this is Taha. I think he's by far committed the most. He's the lead software engineer. Shekhar like comes in a close second with 500 something commits, but massive amount of like code addition, as you can see here. And then you have Alex and Rajesh as well. And then you've got a bunch of like individual contributors as well who are doing minor changes or adjustments. But by far, these two, maybe we should mention Medios as well, of course, because he's the CEO of OpenReplay. So he also loves to get his hands dirty and code a bit. But before we dive in, I love how the project is kind of documented. It's very well documented, and especially as if you're not super familiar with open source and you've come across some of their competitors, but you're looking for an open source solution that you want to self-host for various reasons. The first thing they show you is really the various deployment options that you have, and because they're running on Kubernetes, they can basically deploy anywhere. So it's very simple. For our demo today, we'll deploy it on DigitalOcean, and then we'll actually embed it in a Next.js project so that we can see how OpenReplay actually works in a deployed application. As I mentioned, we're going to use DigitalOcean here. And I love also how they kind of like really in detail explain also the specs for your droplet, because it does run Kubernetes. So, in the installation process, there's, a lot of stuff that's being saved in memory. So you want to make sure you've got that 8 gig of memory available here. And yeah, so the first thing is, I've done this, right? So the first thing is we want to kind of clone the entire repo, get that in here. And then we actually go into the bash scripts that they've set up for Kubernetes. What I'm doing here is actually I'm setting already the domain for OpenReplay, and I've configured my Cloudflare or my domain with the subdomain openreplay.mfts.io. I'll show you this in a sec as well. While this is kind of like installing, this takes a bit. So right here, I've got kind of like my server IP associated in an A record with OpenReplay as a subdomain, and this is the same server IP. Maybe while this is kind of like installing, and it does take a bit, because kind of what we're doing here is installing all the different applications that Kubernetes needs from scratch and uses Helm to do that. It's Helm, if you don't know it, it's the package manager for Kubernetes. So it's gonna pull all the packages in here, kind of like npm for Node. So it does that. But it's very interesting, the decision, and I applaud them for the security here, at least, to really only have OpenReplay run in HTTPS. And there may be some like browser specific configurations why this needs to be, But for example, it doesn't run in localhost. You have to do some workaround. So later on, we'll actually deploy it also on Vercel, because we're running a Next.js application. And you can see here it's actually pulling OpenReplay from Kubernetes as well. So they've got a version released here. We're not really building from source, because if we were to build from source, there's kind of a different set of instructions here. But what we're doing here, we're really pulling the OpenReplay application from the Kubernetes package manager. But this is fine. We're not, at the moment, I'm not interested to deploy it from source. Even though, if we did do this, it would be just as easy. I imagine their documentation is really well written. But you might want to do that if you, for example, want to fork the project. All right, so we're done with the installation. So we're going to use Let's Encrypt to kind of like set up our IP, and this they could actually also pull from what I've entered before, which is an environment variable, but they didn't. But anyway, so the cert manager, of course, is also being installed by Kubernetes. So that again takes a bit. And I wanted to fast forward through these installations, but I just keep talking. So I guess I either have to mute myself or I just keep talking. But this shouldn't take so long. So this is done. What's cool is, they kind of like can forward HTTP to HTTPS. This is just controlling the ingress of Nginx, which is under the hood, but we want to kind of like edit this. And I know I'm using Nano. A lot of you guys probably want to use Vim or something. I'm not a big Vim fan. I like verboseness. So the config is right here, these two. We want to set to true. I think there is an error in there in the documentation, right? Because it says uncomment the block, but the block is already uncommented. So there's an opportunity right here to help them make their documentation better. And okay, obviously this blindly copying doesn't work. If you're already in the repository, in the folder Helm charts, obviously you don't need to get into the folder Helm charts again. So what we're doing here is in the CLI, we're just kind of reinstalling the Nginx because we just changed the Nginx configuration. So this is what will happen here under the hood. All right, and that's it. So we can head over to openreplay.mfts.io. They have this really fun, email. I need to type in password to make it really secure, but I'm just using it. So, I mean, you guys can also get on here, but I'll probably not keep it open for long, or at least have a new session up. All right, and that's it. So there's my first project, and this is kind of like what the interface looks like. I've got a dashboard, an assist. I've got my sessions, which is kind of like the main interface I want to see. They already have all these different kind of clusters of sessions because it's primarily the focus is on solving and debugging issues. I can add multiple projects here, of course, but right now I only have one use case, so I just want to play with this. This is kind of like not super intuitive, but I like that they highlighted this up here, but it says just go to project setup. That's how you get started. I was like searching in the docs before that. So we're using it with a Node application. So we're doing like npm install, and for this I actually have a project ready already. So I've got this Tailwind UI syntax template, and we can drop Tailwind syntax here as well, just so that we can see. So Tailwind UI is kind of like your component library, and Tailwind templates was released just last month, and they've built like full like applications with Next.js mostly. And syntax is kind of their documentation template. So, we're developers, we write a lot of documentation. So this is super cool. And I wanted to guys see this template as well, how it kind of looks and feels. Plus, I don't need to build some like shitty Hello World app. Instead, I can show you a cool website. So right here, I've got this installed already. But if we run through the motions, we could do this. Install OpenReplay tracker. It says already installed, up to date. And then because we're using not a single page application, but a Next.js server-side rendered application, we kind of want to like toggle this, and this is very considerate of them. We're importing the tracker, we're instantiating the tracker with the project key. This seems to be like the only place where I can find the project key somehow. They should have this like somewhere like front and center. Maybe also a bit of like optimization for developers. Depends how many projects you have. So if you put it in once, it's there. You don't need to change it. And I'm also going to do something that no one should do. Put project keys straight in the tracker. But you can actually do this in this case. It's not so harmful. You can also put it in an end file. Then if you deploy it, publicly, or so, doesn't get seen. The ingest point is already correct. And then we have on the bottom kind of like our use effect tracker start. So I've put this in here into the class. So in the default function, we have kind of like where we start our tracker. As I don't have any like login, so this is done, I can kind of like identify users and like set like user IDs here. It doesn't need to be an email. It can be a random identifier. I can add like meta tags such as like source, where the people come from maybe, that visit this. I can add up to 10, I guess, because I'm self-hosting this. If I were to build it from source, I could probably increase this amount of keys if I needed them. And this is how I set metadata as well. I'm not going to do any of this. I'm not going to invite any collaborators either. I'm not going to integrate it with anything, but obviously you can. There's a bunch of plugins for Redux, but I don't know, not so many people use Redux anymore. But GraphQL for sure. And then obviously GitHub, Jira, Slack to kind of like report when there's a new replay coming in or new recording. So that's it. I've updated kind of like my project key, and I'm just gonna deploy it on Vercel, kind of update that, and that should be very quick. So what's also to consider is, and they mentioned this, it takes a few minutes for the first recording to appear. So there we go. So this is kind of this is the Tailwind UI template called syntax. And this is, if I go in here in network, what I can see is that OpenReplay MFTS.io ingest is being called already. So let me close this again because it's actually recording the viewport. So if you shrink the browser or anything, it will shrink the video as well, and we'll see that in a bit. But what it's doing is kind of recording my actions here, my scrolling through, my hovering, my clicking as well. So installation, architecture guide. We've been here for what, like a minute now? So I think it's good to leave, and then, kind of like OpenReplay can do its thing and send the recording to my instance. And while this happens, I'm just gonna like fast forward and not talk. All right. So for you, it was pretty quick. For me, it took a bit. But the first video is here. Not sure why it's 2 minutes and 57 seconds, but I guess the web worker, and why am I so bright? I don't know. But I guess the web worker has like a cutoff for when when it thinks that you're no longer active on the website, so that it stops sending this. Interestingly, there are a few issues. So let's have a look. It says anonymous user because I didn't set a user ID. So let's see what happens here, and it already starts playing, right? So I've kind of got my website here. It looks exactly the same as you've known. You can see here that it's, this is what I mean by it kind of like shrinks the viewport. If you open the DevTools, for example, it's not recording the DevTools, it's just recording your viewport. So your viewport shrinks if you open the dev port. It means you have less of a view. And you can see here some highlights of actions that I've taken. So these are probably clicks, but let's have a look. What's happening here? Yeah, so these are clicks. You can see here also how the mouse kind of like has this like ripple effect. And these are clicks that actually redirect. So these bit thicker bars. And you've got a bunch of thick bars here. And then you've got a high CPU load right here. But this is probably because my computer is not as young as it used to be. All right, that's enough of the video. What I want to show you other than that is that you can obviously look at, error logging. You can look at the network tab, kind of understand how, like, what's happening to your website, what's taking how much like seconds to load. And so this is super valuable to debug especially the side of your user when you're not in there using their machine. You can see the general performance over the course of the video. So this is always the time axis on the bottom. Kind of, you can see here the like amount of seconds that it took. We can see different states. That only works if we could hook up like our state management. I would love them if it works for some kind of, like with the React state machine, because that's kind of like becoming the state of the art. Maybe they do already, because I didn't use anything in the state, obviously, but this would be cool. Events, there's nothing to record here because I think no events happened. Let's have a look. High CPU is just a minor issue. And we can see here kind of like over the past 7 days, if we're recording the same website, kind of like how many clicks were there, and kind of like how many events happened. These are all the different events, I guess, that happened. Like I visited this page, I clicked here, I visited that page, I clicked here. So these are different events than the events that are shown down here. And then of course I can share it also to Slack, or just share it within my my workspace with my team, I immediately get kind of like where I'm located, what time it was, the version of Chrome, my computer setup, and the screen size. So this is all handy. And what else I wanted to show you is that it's not only a obviously we can also go in the DevTools right here, and I'm just going to move my head around here. And what's interesting is, when you imagine this is a video, right? And it was just recorded and uploaded like an MP4 file, but it's not. If we look in here, so it's actually an iframe, and the iframe is basically my website. So, and then it's a recording within that iframe. So it's like hard to wrap my head around it, but it's identical to kind of like how Next.js, how the setup of Next.js is, except that they add like different effects to it, such as like OpenReplay hover and Asayer hover. Asayer is the previous name of OpenReplay. So there's probably some old code still in here, but it's in the end it's like different tags and classes to indicate what happens here when someone hovers over it. Yeah, so it's basically the exact same like HTML structure, and that's pretty cool. So I think it works really well for Next.js because it is server-side rendered, so you get like pure HTML in the front end. Don't need to deal with like crazy JavaScript in the front end that's loading, jumping in, mixing up the DOM, and yeah, this is what I want to show you last. Check out the project on GitHub. I was playing around here. Check out the project on GitHub. It's really awesome. You can easily deploy it on your own. If you don't need to make changes, just deploy with Kubernetes. If you do want to make changes, like I said, deploy it from source or fork it. This will be much easier. Thanks so much for listening in. And yeah, I see you in the next week.